The morning sun tried to shine through the thick gray clouds over London, but it felt like even the sky was sad today. William stood near the big window in their private room at Kensington Palace. His hands were pressed against the cold glass as he watched the world outside continue like nothing had changed. But everything had changed for him and Kate. Kate sat on their favorite sofa in the corner of the room. It was the same blue sofa where they used to laugh together every evening after putting the children to bed. Now she sat there with her hands folded tight in her lap. Her fingers kept moving nervously, like she was trying to hold something together that wanted to fall apart. The children were playing in the next room. William could hear their happy voices and the sound of toys being moved around on the wooden floor. George was telling Charlotte and Louis a story about brave knights and beautiful princesses. The innocent sound of their laughter felt so different from the heavy silence that had filled the palace for weeks. William turned away from the window and looked at his wife. Kate was staring at a small drawing that Louis had made for them that morning. It showed their family as stick figures holding hands under a big rainbow. All the stick people had big smiles drawn on their faces. The simple picture sat on the coffee table like a reminder of happier times. 3 weeks ago, their world had turned upside down. News had come that shook the entire royal family. It was the kind of news that made strong people feel weak and brave people feel scared. William had always been taught to stay calm and strong no matter what happened. But this was different. This was about family and health and things that money and titles could not fix. The newspapers and television reporters had been relentless. Every time William and Kate stepped outside, someone was there with cameras and microphones. They shouted questions that felt like arrows aimed at their hearts. The children had started asking why so many people wanted to take their pictures and why everyone looked so serious all the time. Kate had been trying so hard to be strong for everyone. She made breakfast every morning with a smile on her face. She read bedtime stories with the same gentle voice she always used. She attended her royal duties and smiled for the cameras when she had to. But William could see the tiredness in her eyes. He could see how hard she was working to keep everything normal for their children. Staff members moved quietly through the palace halls. Mrs. Henderson, who had worked there for 20 years, spoke in whispers. James, the security guard, who usually joked with the children, now just nodded politely when he saw them. Even the palace dog seemed to sense that this was a time for quiet footsteps and careful words. William walked across the room and sat down next to Kate on the blue sofa. He took her hand in both of his hands. Her fingers felt cold even though the room was warm. They had been married for years and had faced many challenges together. They had dealt with media storms and royal protocol and the pressure of always being watched by the world. But this felt bigger than anything they had faced before. Kate looked up at him, and William could see she was fighting back tears. Her brown eyes were bright with unshed emotion. She had always been his anchor during difficult times. When he felt overwhelmed by his royal duties, she reminded him why their work mattered. When he missed his mother, she helped him remember the good times instead of focusing on the sadness. Now it was his turn to be strong for her. William squeezed her hand gently and moved closer on the sofa. Outside the window, London continued its busy day. People walked to work and children went to school and life moved forward like it always did. But inside the palace, time felt frozen. They were stuck in a moment of fear and uncertainty that seemed to stretch on forever. The sound of their children laughing drifted in from the next room again. That sound was like a light shining in the darkness of their worries. No matter what else was happening, they still had their beautiful family. They still had each other. And somehow that would have to be enough to get them through whatever came next. The next morning brought no peace to William and Kate. William sat at his wooden desk, trying to read important papers that needed his attention. The black words on white paper seemed to dance and blur together. His mind could not focus on royal duties when his heart was breaking with worry about his family. His phone buzzed every few minutes with new messages. Palace advisors wanted meetings. Family members sent worried texts asking for updates. Friends from around the world offered help that felt empty because no one could really understand what they were going through. Each buzz of the phone made William feel more trapped and overwhelmed. Kate had barely slept the night before. Every hour she got up from bed to check on George, Charlotte, and Louis. She would stand in their doorways watching them sleep peacefully. Their faces looked so innocent and calm. Kate wanted to protect that innocence, but she did not know how much longer she could keep the scary truth of their situation hidden from them. The morning passed slowly like thick honey dripping from a spoon. Kate tried to do normal things. She attempted to plan meals for the week. She looked through the children's school schedules. She watered the plants in their private garden. But her hands shook with every simple task. The weight of pretending everything was normal felt heavier than any crown she had ever worn. By lunchtime, William could not concentrate on anything. He had read the same paragraph in a government report 5 times without understanding a single word. His private secretary knocked on the door twice to remind him about afternoon appointments, but William just stared out the window at the gray London sky. Kate went to the kitchen to prepare lunch for the family. Cooking had always been something that relaxed her. She loved making simple meals that brought everyone together around their dining table. But today, even this felt impossible. Her hands trembled as she reached for plates in the cabinet. The white china plate slipped from her fingers like it had a mind of its own. It crashed to the kitchen floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire palace. The broken pieces scattered across the black and white tiles like tiny mirrors reflecting her shattered composure. Kate stared down at the broken plate, and something inside her broke too. All the tears she had been holding back for weeks came flooding out like water through a broken dam. She sank down to the kitchen floor right there among the sharp pieces of china. Her shoulders shook as she finally let herself cry all the tears she had been saving up. William heard the crash and came running to the kitchen. He found his wife sitting on the floor surrounded by broken china, with tears streaming down her face. Without thinking about his expensive suit or royal dignity, he knelt down beside her on the hard kitchen tiles. He pulled Kate close to his chest and held her tight while she sobbed. His own tears started falling too as he finally allowed himself to feel all the fear and sadness he had been pushing down. For weeks they had been trying to be strong for everyone else. They had worn brave faces for their children and calm expressions for the public. But here in their kitchen with no one watching, they could finally be human. Kate cried into William's shoulder until his shirt was damp with her tears. She whispered the words she had been afraid to say out loud. She told him she was scared. She admitted she did not know how to fix this problem or make everything better for their family. William held her tighter and whispered back that he was scared too. For the first time in their marriage, they sat together admitting they did not have all the answers. They were just 2 people who loved each other trying to find their way through the darkest time of their lives. The children's voices could still be heard from somewhere else in the palace playing their innocent games. That sound reminded William and Kate why they had to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. The morning after their breakdown in the kitchen felt different somehow. William woke up before Kate and lay in bed watching the early sunlight creep through their bedroom curtains. The light looked warmer today, even though the weather outside was still gray and cloudy. Kate stirred beside him and opened her eyes slowly. When she saw William looking at her, she smiled for the first time in days. It was not a big smile, but it was real. Her face looked softer than it had in weeks, like some of the worry lines had smoothed away during the night. Their bedroom door burst open as George ran in wearing his pajamas and messy hair. He jumped onto their bed with the energy that only children have in the morning. Charlotte and Louis followed behind him, giggling and chattering about dreams they had during the night. Louis climbed up between his parents and started telling them about a dream where he could fly like a bird over the palace gardens. Charlotte sat cross-legged at the foot of the bed, describing a magical tea party she had with invisible friends. George laid on his stomach next to William and drew pictures in the air with his finger while explaining a story about dragons and castles. For the first time in weeks, William and Kate found themselves laughing at their children's silly morning stories. The sound of their own laughter surprised them both. They had forgotten how good it felt to smile without forcing it. The children's innocent joy reminded them of what really mattered in life. During breakfast, the mood felt lighter than it had in a long time. The children ate their cereal and toast while chattering about their plans for the day. Kate made scrambled eggs without her hands shaking. William read parts of the newspaper out loud that he thought might interest the children. When William's private secretary knocked on the dining room door, he brought news that was not terrible for once. There had been a small positive development in the situation that had been causing them so much worry. It was not a complete solution, but it was progress. After weeks of only bad news, this tiny bit of hope felt like finding water in a desert. Kate reached across the breakfast table and squeezed William's hand. They shared a look that said they were going to get through this together, no matter what happened. The children continued eating and talking, completely unaware that their parents were communicating without words the way couples do after years of marriage. After breakfast, William and Kate walked through the palace gardens together. The roses were blooming despite the cloudy weather. Kate stopped to smell a deep red rose that reminded her of their wedding flowers. William picked a small yellow flower and tucked it behind her ear, making her laugh like she used to when they were dating. They sat on their favorite bench under the old oak tree, where they often came to talk about important decisions. The tree had been there for over 100 years and had probably witnessed many other couples sitting in its shade during difficult times. There was something comforting about being part of that long history of people who had faced challenges and survived. Kate leaned against William's shoulder, and they watched their children playing on the grass nearby. George was teaching Charlotte and Louis how to do cartwheels. Their laughter echoed across the garden like music. In that moment, William and Kate remembered why they fought so hard to protect this life they had built together. The heavy feeling that had been pressing down on them for weeks was starting to lift just a little bit. They still had the same problems to solve, but somehow they felt stronger. Maybe it was because they had finally let themselves be weak together. Maybe it was because they remembered they were not facing this alone. Just as William and Kate were beginning to feel like they could breathe again, something unexpected happened. William's phone started ringing during their quiet afternoon in the garden. The sound seemed too loud and harsh compared to the peaceful moment they were sharing with their children. William looked at the phone screen, and his eyebrows raised in surprise. The name showing on the display was someone he had not heard from in many months. It was Lady Margaret Thornfield, an elderly woman who had been a close friend of his grandmother. She lived in a beautiful old estate in the countryside far from London and the busy royal life. William answered the phone, wondering why Lady Margaret would be calling them now. Her voice sounded warm, but also urgent in a way that made William pay careful attention to every word she said. The conversation was short but very mysterious. She asked William and Kate to come visit her estate that very day. She said it was important, but would not explain why over the phone. When William hung up, he looked at Kate with a puzzled expression. Kate could see questions in his eyes and concern in the way he held his shoulders. She moved closer to him on the garden bench and waited for him to explain what the strange phone call had been about. William told Kate about Lady Margaret's invitation to visit the old estate. Kate remembered the place from years ago when they were still dating. They had visited there a few times during their early relationship when they needed to escape from public attention. The old estate had always felt like a magical place where they could just be William and Kate instead of royal figures. The idea of leaving London and going somewhere peaceful sounded wonderful to Kate, but also a little scary. After everything they had been through recently, the thought of going anywhere unfamiliar made her feel nervous. But something in William's voice suggested that maybe this was exactly what they needed right now. They arranged for the children to stay with William's father and stepmother for the day. George, Charlotte, and Louis were excited about the visit and did not ask too many questions about where their parents were going. Kate packed a small bag with simple clothes instead of the formal outfits she usually had to wear for royal duties. William chose to drive them to the estate in their personal car instead of using the official royal vehicles. As they left London behind and drove through the English countryside, Kate felt some of the tension leaving her shoulders. The rolling green hills and old stone walls looked so peaceful compared to the busy city streets. They drove past sheep grazing in fields and small villages with thatched roof cottages that looked like something from a fairy tale. Kate rolled down her window to smell the fresh country air that was so different from the city smells of London. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could take deep breaths without her chest feeling tight with worry. The drive took about 2 hours, and they spent most of it in comfortable silence. Sometimes William would point out something interesting like an old church or a field full of wildflowers. Kate would smile and make small comments, but mostly she just enjoyed the feeling of moving away from their problems towards something unknown, but hopefully better. When they finally saw the estate appearing around a bend in the country road, Kate felt her heart skip a beat. The old stone building looked exactly the same as it had when they were young and falling in love. The ivy-covered walls and tall windows seemed to welcome them back like old friends who had been waiting patiently for their return. Walking through the main entrance of the estate felt like stepping into a time machine that took William and Kate back to their younger selves. Everything looked exactly the same as they remembered from their secret romantic weekends years ago. The same old paintings hung on the walls in their heavy gold frames. The same Persian rugs covered the polished wooden floors with their intricate patterns of red and blue. The grandfather clock in the corner still ticked with the same steady rhythm that had once helped them fall asleep during lazy Sunday afternoons. Kate ran her fingers along the smooth wooden banister of the staircase where she used to sit and watch William read books by the fireplace. Every corner of this place held memories of when they were just two young people in love, instead of public figures carrying the weight of royal duty. But something was different too, and it took them a few minutes to figure out what had changed. There were fresh white roses in crystal vases that had been empty during their previous visits. The air smelled like something delicious was cooking in the kitchen, which surprised them because Lady Margaret had not mentioned preparing a meal. Soft classical music played quietly from somewhere deeper in the house. On the hall table where mail was usually stacked, they found a handwritten note written in elegant script on cream-colored paper. The message was short but intriguing. It simply said, "Follow the rose petals," and nothing more. There was no signature, but the handwriting looked familiar to Kate, though she could not quite place where she had seen it before. Kate looked at William and laughed despite all the stress they had been carrying. "Rose petals," she said, shaking her head with amusement. "This feels like something from a romantic movie." But William was already looking around, and he spotted the beginning of a trail. Deep red rose petals were scattered across the floor, leading down the hallway they remembered so well. The hallway held special meaning for both of them. It was the same corridor where they had shared their first kiss as an engaged couple. They had been so nervous that day, worried about photographers and public opinion, and whether they were making the right decision. But in this quiet hallway away from the world, they had found the courage to follow their hearts. Following the rose petal trail felt like being children again, playing a game of treasure hunt. The petals led them through room after room, and each space brought back a flood of memories. There was the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, where they had spent entire afternoons talking about their dreams for the future and the kind of life they wanted to build together. They passed the conservatory with its glass walls and tropical plants, where William had practiced his proposal speech over and over again. Kate had never known about those practice sessions until years later, when William finally confessed how nervous he had been about asking her to marry him. The memory made her smile and squeeze his hand as they continued following the mysterious trail. The rose petals led them past the dining room, where they had shared candlelit dinners and made plans for their wedding. They walked by the sitting room, where they had watched old movies curled up together on the overstuffed sofa. Each room whispered stories of their love and reminded them of all the reasons they had chosen each other in the first place. Kate felt the knot of worry in her chest, loosening with each step they took through this house full of happy memories. For weeks, she had been so focused on their current problems that she had forgotten about all the joy and love they had already shared. This place was like a photo album come to life, showing them scenes from the beautiful story they had written together. William found himself walking slower and paying attention to every detail around them. He had forgotten how peaceful this place was and how good it felt to be somewhere that held only positive memories. The rose petal trail seemed to be leading them toward the back of the house to rooms they had never explored during their previous visits. His curiosity grew stronger with each step, as he wondered what surprise was waiting for them at the end of this romantic treasure hunt. The trail of rose petals finally stopped at a door that William and Kate had never noticed before during their previous visits to the estate. It was tucked away behind a heavy tapestry in what they had always thought was just a dead-end corridor. The door looked very old and was made of dark wood that had been polished smooth by many years of careful attention. Carved into the wood were two hearts intertwined together in an intricate design that seemed to shimmer in the soft light coming through the corridor windows. The brass door handle was worn smooth by countless hands that had turned it over the decades. Everything about this hidden door suggested it held secrets and stories that went back many generations. William reached for the handle, but paused for a moment, looking at Kate with uncertainty in his eyes. After everything they had been through in recent weeks, he was not sure he was ready for more surprises. Kate saw his hesitation and moved closer to him, placing her hand gently on his arm in the way that always gave him courage. Together they turned the handle, and the door opened with a soft creaking sound that seemed to whisper welcome. The room beyond was small and cozy, with warm light coming from candles placed on every available surface. But they were not alone in the room. Sitting in comfortable chairs around a small fireplace were people they had not expected to see. Lady Margaret was there, of course, smiling at them, with the kind expression they remembered from years past. But there were others too. William recognized his Aunt Sarah, who had traveled from Scotland to be there. Kate saw her sister Pippa sitting near the window with a gentle smile on her face. There were close friends from their university days, and even some palace staff members who had become like family over the years. The room itself was decorated in a way that told the story of William and Kate's relationship. Photographs covered every wall, showing moments from their courtship through their wedding to candid pictures of them with their children. The images were arranged like a timeline of their love story, reminding them of all the happiness they had shared together. Soft music played in the background, and the scent of roses filled the air from flower arrangements placed throughout the room. Candles flickered warmly, creating dancing shadows on the walls that made everything feel magical and dreamlike. It was clear that someone had spent considerable time and effort creating this special surprise for them. But this was not just a random gathering of people they cared about. As William and Kate looked more closely at the faces in the room, they realized these were specifically chosen individuals who had played important roles during difficult times in their lives. These were the people who had stood by them, supported them, and helped them through previous challenges. Kate recognized her friend Emma, who had been there during the difficult early days of media attention, when Kate was learning how to handle public scrutiny. William saw his military friend James, who had helped him through the dark period after his mother's death. Each person in the room represented strength, support, and love during times when William and Kate had needed it most. Lady Margaret stood up from her chair and walked toward them with her arms open wide. Her eyes were bright with tears of joy as she embraced them both. "Welcome to the sanctuary," she said in her gentle voice. "This room has been waiting for you both for a very long time." She gestured toward the walls and the photographs and the other people gathered there. William and Kate looked around the room again with new understanding. This was not just a surprise party or a casual gathering. This was something much deeper and more meaningful. Every person, every photograph, every carefully chosen detail was there for a specific reason, related to their current struggles and their need for hope and healing. Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but these were different from the tears she had been crying for weeks. These were tears of gratitude and amazement at the love that surrounded them. She had been feeling so alone in their struggles, but now she could see that they had never been alone at all. They were part of a community of people who cared deeply about their well-being and happiness. Lady Margaret gestured for William and Kate to sit in two comfortable chairs that had been placed in the center of the room, facing all their loved ones. As they settled into the soft cushions, Kate noticed that everyone was looking at them with expressions of love and concern, but also with something that looked like hope and determination. Mrs. Henderson, the longtime palace housekeeper, stepped forward first. She had worked for the royal family for over 30 years and had watched William grow up from a young boy into the man he was today. Her voice was gentle but strong as she began to speak about the difficult times she had witnessed the royal family survive over the decades. She told them about other moments in royal history when everything seemed hopeless, but somehow the family had found a way through. She reminded William of his grandmother's strength during World War II and his father's perseverance through his own difficult periods. Mrs. Henderson's words helped William realize that facing impossible challenges was part of his family heritage and that he had inherited the strength to overcome them. Kate's sister Pippa spoke next, sharing memories of how Kate had always been the strongest person in their family, even as a young girl. She reminded Kate of the time when their father had lost his job, and Kate had organized the entire family to work together to save their home. Pippa's voice grew emotional as she described how Kate had never given up hope even when things looked impossible. One by one, each person in the room shared a story or memory that related to William and Kate's current situation. William's university friend Tom talked about a time when William had helped him through a personal crisis that seemed unsolvable. Kate's college roommate Sarah described how Kate had supported her through the loss of her mother with endless patience and kindness. Each story was different, but they all carried the same message. William and Kate had both shown incredible strength and compassion throughout their lives. They had helped others through dark times, and now it was their turn to receive that same kind of support. The people in this room were here to remind them that they were not facing their current challenges alone. Lady Margaret moved to an antique wooden chest in the corner of the room and opened it carefully. Inside were hundreds of letters, cards, and small gifts that had been sent from people all over the world. Some were from children who had been inspired by Kate's charity work with young people. Others were from veterans who had been helped by William's military support programs. There were drawings from hospital patients they had visited, and thank you notes from families whose lives had been touched by their kindness. Letters came from teachers whose schools had received royal visits and from community leaders whose projects had been supported by the Royal Foundation. Each piece of correspondence was a reminder of the positive impact William and Kate had made on individual lives. Kate picked up a letter written in crayon by a 7-year-old girl who had met Kate during a hospital visit. The child had drawn a picture of Kate wearing a crown made of flowers and had written that she wanted to be kind and helpful like the princess when she grew up. The innocent words brought fresh tears to Kate's eyes as she realized how many people were counting on her to stay strong. William found a letter from a young soldier who had served in Afghanistan at the same time as William. The man wrote about how William's leadership and friendship had helped him through the most difficult period of his military service. He explained that knowing someone like William cared about his well-being had given him the strength to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. As they read letter after letter, William and Kate began to understand the true purpose of this gathering. These people had not come together just to offer sympathy or empty words of comfort. They had come to remind William and Kate of their own strength and to show them concrete evidence of all the good they had already accomplished together. The weight of their current problems was still there, but it felt different now. Instead of being crushed by fear and uncertainty, they felt supported by an army of people who believed in them and needed them to succeed. Their struggles were not just about their own family anymore, but about all the lives they could continue to touch and improve if they found the courage to keep moving forward. As the afternoon turned into evening, the atmosphere in the secret room became even more magical. Someone had brought out a small table filled with simple but delicious food. There were sandwiches cut into neat triangles, fresh fruit arranged on silver platters, and a beautiful cake decorated with white roses that matched the ones scattered throughout the room. But the most important discovery was still to come. Lady Margaret walked back to the antique chest and carefully lifted out something that made both William and Kate gasp with surprise. It was a leather-bound journal with their initials carved into the cover, surrounded by the same intertwined hearts that decorated the door. Lady Margaret explained that this journal held a very special tradition connected to the estate. For over 100 years, couples who had faced difficult times had been invited to this secret room to write down their fears and hopes. Years later, many of these same couples had returned to read what they had written and to see how their lives had unfolded. She opened the journal carefully and showed them entries from couples spanning several generations. Some pages were yellowed with age and written in old-fashioned handwriting that was difficult to read. Other entries were more recent and written in modern ink on crisp white pages. Each entry told a story of love tested by hardship and strengthened by perseverance. Kate read an entry from 1943 written by a young woman whose husband was fighting in World War II. The woman had written about her fears that she would never see him again and her hopes that somehow they would survive the war and build a family together. In different colored ink, someone had added a note years later explaining that the couple had indeed reunited and lived happily together for 50 years. William found an entry that made his heart skip a beat. It was written in his own handwriting from just a few months after their wedding. He had completely forgotten about writing in this journal during a previous visit to the estate. The entry was dated during a time when he had been struggling with doubts about whether he could handle the pressures of royal life. Reading his younger self's words reminded William of how much he and Kate had already overcome together. The problems that had seemed so overwhelming years ago now looked small compared to the strength they had built as a couple. His past fears about their ability to survive royal scrutiny seemed almost silly now that they had proven themselves capable of handling far greater challenges. Kate found her own entry on the next page written in her careful handwriting. She had written about her worries about being good enough for the royal family and her hopes that she could make a positive difference in her new role. Reading her own words from years ago helped her remember how far she had come and how many of her dreams had actually come true. Lady Margaret brought out another surprise from the chest. It was a small golden key attached to a silk ribbon the same deep red color as the rose petals they had followed through the house. The key looked very old and was decorated with tiny hearts and flowers carved into the metal. It caught the candlelight and seemed to glow with its own inner warmth. "This key," she explained with a smile, "belongs to this room. This sanctuary will always be here for you whenever you need to remember who you are beneath all the titles and responsibilities. The key is not just for opening the door, but for unlocking the memories of love and support that will always surround you both." William took the key with trembling hands, understanding that this was much more than just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of hope and a tangible reminder that they were never truly alone in their struggles. The key represented all the love that had been poured into creating this special place and all the people who believed in their ability to overcome any challenge. Kate touched the key gently and felt a sense of peace settle over her heart. For weeks she had been searching for something to hold on to during their dark time. Now she had found it in the simple golden key that represented the unbreakable bonds of love and community that would always be there to support them through whatever trials lay ahead. As the sun began to set outside the windows of the secret room, the golden light streaming through the glass seemed to bless everything it touched. The candles continued to flicker warmly, and the faces of all their loved ones glowed with contentment and hope. What had started as the darkest period of William and Kate's marriage was transforming into something beautiful and healing. The gathering evolved naturally from a formal meeting into something that felt more like a celebration. People began sharing funny stories and embarrassing memories from William and Kate's past that made everyone laugh until their sides hurt. Kate's university friend told the story of how Kate had once gotten locked out of her dormitory in her pajamas and had to climb through a window. William's military friend shared a tale about William trying to cook dinner for his unit and nearly setting the entire camp kitchen on fire. For the first time in weeks, William and Kate found themselves laughing so hard that tears streamed down their faces. But these were tears of joy instead of sadness. They had forgotten how good it felt to be surrounded by people who loved them, not because of their royal titles, but simply because of who they were as human beings. The children would have loved to see their parents like this, Kate thought as she watched William telling an animated story about his first attempt at public speaking. George, Charlotte, and Louis rarely got to see their parents completely relaxed and carefree like this. The thought of her children made Kate realize how much she wanted to get back to being the kind of mother who could laugh and play without the weight of worry constantly pressing down on her shoulders. As the evening grew later, Lady Margaret suggested that it was time for everyone to say their goodbyes. But before the gathering ended, she wanted to give William and Kate one final gift. She led them to a corner of the room where an easel had been set up with a large canvas covered by a white cloth. When she pulled away the cloth, William and Kate saw a beautiful painting that took their breath away. It showed the secret room exactly as it looked that evening with all their loved ones gathered around them. But the painting also included George, Charlotte, and Louis sitting on the floor playing quietly while their parents were surrounded by love and support. The artist had somehow captured not just the physical appearance of the room, but also the emotional feeling of hope and community that filled the space. Looking at the painting, William and Kate could see themselves as others saw them, not as perfect royal figures, but as real people deserving of love and capable of overcoming any challenge life might bring. The painting would hang in their private quarters at Kensington Palace as a daily reminder of this magical evening. Whenever they felt overwhelmed by their responsibilities or frightened by uncertain situations, they could look at the painting and remember that they were part of something bigger than their individual fears. As they prepared to leave the estate and return to London, the golden key sat between them on the car seat, catching the last rays of sunlight. William reached over and squeezed Kate's hand as they drove through the countryside toward home. They knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. The problems that had been causing them so much worry were not magically solved. But something fundamental had changed in how they viewed their situation. They no longer felt like they were facing their difficulties alone. They had been reminded of their own strength and surrounded by concrete evidence of how much love and support existed in their lives. The key in William's pocket was not just a symbol, but a promise that this love would always be available whenever they needed it most. The drive home was peaceful and filled with comfortable silence. Kate watched the familiar English countryside pass by their windows and felt a sense of calm that had been missing from her life for weeks. William drove with steady hands and a clear mind, knowing that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together, strengthened by the love they had been shown and the hope they had rediscovered in a secret room behind a hidden door. Full of happy memories. For weeks, she had been so focused on their current problems that she had forgotten about all the joy and love they had already shared. This place was like a photo album come to life, showing them scenes from the beautiful story they had written together. William found himself walking slower and paying attention to every detail around them. He had forgotten how peaceful this place was and how good it felt to be somewhere that held only positive memories. The rose petal trail seemed to be leading them toward the back of the house to rooms they had never explored during their previous visits.